This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and healthful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.
We will get started. Welcome everyone to the monthly meeting, Vegetarian Society of Hawaii. We are a nonprofit organization founded in 1990 for the purpose of human health, animal rights, and protection of the environment by means of vegetarian education. We're one of the largest vegetarian societies in the nation with over 2,000 members. We have membership flyers, and we do recommend that you join our organization, although of course it's not required to attend our meetings. But if you do, you'll receive a membership card that serves as a discount card at some of the natural food stores, Huckleberry Farms, Down to Earth, etc. You'll also start to receive our quarterly newsletter, which is popular and filled with interesting articles on health and animal rights and so forth. And most of all, you'll have the satisfaction of knowing that you're helping to support a compassionate lifestyle, a healthy lifestyle in our islands. We also welcome and invite you all to join our band of volunteers. We have a very small group of volunteers that has been volunteering for about 15 years, and we are moving on, not away from the Vegetarian Society, but in years, and we really do welcome new faces, new ideas, and anyone who thinks they can contribute or would like to get involved. Please see, again, Patrick is over there at the table with the Aloha shirt. He's our volunteer director. So he would be the ideal one to talk with about how your interests and skills might match the needs of the Vegetarian Society. Refreshments tonight are courtesy of Down to Earth Natural Foods. Please stay after the meeting and enjoy some delicious, nutritious, low-fat vegan snacks. Tonight's show is going to be videotaped for broadcast on our weekly TV series entitled Vegetarian. On Oahu, it airs on Thursdays at 6 p.m. on Olelo, Channel 52. We recommend that you tape each show, keep the ones you like, and tape over the rest, because you won't have access otherwise. Many of the previous lectures can be viewed online on the Vegetarian Society website, vsh.org. Tonight's lecture will be added to the website in the near future. It's now time for our very special guest. We're delighted to have with us again tonight Dr. William Harris. A vegan for more than 40 years, Dr. Harris is founding and current director of the Vegetarian Society. Prior to his retirement, he was an emergency physician and director of the Kaiser Permanente Vegetarian Lifestyle Clinic. He received his medical degree from the University of California, San Francisco, and is author of the Scientific Basis of Vegetarianism, a few copies of which we have on the table. Retirement has allowed Dr. Harris to maintain and even increase his physical activity. Swims, and he does other aerobic exercise daily, and continues to hone his trampoline skills. He's been an active pilot for many years and a skydiver with more than 800 jumps to his credit. Please welcome Dr. William Harris.
Okay, can everyone hear me back there if I shout? This happens to be the world's worst place to have a microphone-involved meeting. Well, good evening, everyone, and thanks for coming. I hope you'll enjoy this and get something out of it. Thought I'd start off with a little Shavian wit from the early 20th century. G.K. Chesterton was a detective story writer, and he's a good buddy of George Bernard Shaw, who was a playwright, a very famous one, and also a very ardent vegetarian, one of the first. And Chesterton once said to Shaw, "To look at you, Shaw, anyone would think there was a famine in Ireland." To which Shaw replied, "To look at you, Chesterton, anyone would think that you had caused it." I want to put you in mind of the resources I have for you on my website, VegSource.com. My entire book is up in PDF format for anybody that wants to download it. And I've also brought in a few hard copies. And if you want one, you can pay $10 and the proceeds will go to the Vegetarian Society. There's also a complete database, USDA nutrient database, SR13, up online. You can download it. It turns into an Excel spreadsheet. And with this spreadsheet, you will have 6,210 food items and 171 nutrient columns. They're sortable both by nutrient weight ratio, which is the wrong way to do things, and nutrient calorie ratio, which is the right way to do things. And if the nutritionists would stop sorting foods by nutrient weight ratio, I think most of our obesity problems would go away in this country, because that's the wrong way to do it. There's also a vegan food database that I put together by winnowing out all of the vegan foods in the main database. And on page 5, there is a vegan weight, food, and exercise questionnaire in which you can compute your body mass index automatically by simply plugging in your weight here and your height in inches over here. And then there's a food questionnaire and an exercise questionnaire that's self-calculating. I also put in a health diary on sheet 6. You can keep track of your weight, your blood pressure, your pulse, what you ate any particular day, and you can add whatever other important things you think might be useful. I think that sooner or later the medical system is going to get so tight that it'll be difficult to get your own laboratory records. So my advice is to get your hard copy lab data from the hospital or your doctor and then plug it into the spreadsheet. Okay, now in my opinion, a vegan diet and exercise are the prime determinants of health. And exercise is not negotiable. The only reason for not exercising every day is a death certificate at least 24 hours old. If it's any less than that, you have to go out and run. And I suggest that you pick at least 3 different kinds of exercise. There's nothing really critical about what you do. What is important is that you do it every day and that it be enough to raise your pulse and blood pressure and make you sweat a little bit and breathe hard. My particular choice of exercise is in the gymnastic vein. This is a rope climb. It's a pretty good upper body workout. And I can still do this. A lot of the other things that you'll be seeing I can't, but that I can do. And this is my main activity, which is trampoline. Now there's a lot of work, and these are about all the tricks I can still do on the trampoline, but better than nothing. And then my favorite outdoor activity is jumping out of an airplane. And this is a skydive that I did last Thursday with another guy who's doing the camera. If we were better skydivers, you wouldn't be getting a panoramic view of all of the North Shore. There's Haleiwa in the background, and Kaena Point is about to come up, and that's my parachute coming down with me in it. And that's a typical landing when I don't splatter myself, which happens occasionally. And that's what it's all about. Okay, now, to go over some basic points, why vegan diets work. There are 2 classes of essential nutrients. All of the minerals that you require in your diet are elements in the periodic table. All the organic nutrients were made by plants. Minerals were all made in stars that blew up a minimum of 5 billion years ago. And all of the essential organic nutrients are synthesized by plants and microorganisms only. None of them are made by animals. So when you eat animal food, you're just getting secondhand nutrition. And they begin with the photosynthesis of glucose. This is a chloroplast in a plant leaf. It takes these various inorganic compounds or atoms And it uses sunlight to drive a photochemical reaction that produces first glucose, and then it manufactures all of the essential amino acids, the fatty acids, all the true vitamins, plus all of the phytonutrients, which are things that we're just starting to learn about. Phytonutrients are essential because they are mostly antioxidants, and even if you live a perfect life, you are going to have to put up with the problem of lipid peroxidation. It's part of the scheme of things. Your metabolism generates free radicals. They bounce around in the cell, and unless you have an adequate supply of antioxidants, they will knock over the furniture, but the antioxidants take the lipids out of circulation. If you go vegetarian, somebody's going to ask you, where do you get enough protein? And the answer is, protein is a copolymer of amino acids, and all of the essential amino acids, which are the green ones over on this side, are made only by plants. And the reason is that it takes more enzymes to put them together. It takes about an average of 6 enzymes to make the essential aminos, whereas these non-essential ones over here are essential metabolites, but they're not essential nutrients because you can make them yourself, and they only take about 1.5. And okay, the vitamins. Now the vitamins are also made only by plants and microorganisms, as you see down this side. Now if we were cats, I wouldn't be able to say that, because cats need dietary arachidonic acid, carnitine, DHA, EPA, retinol, and taurine. They can only get those from animals, but we're not cats, so we don't need that. I'd like to say a few things about a topical item. You've probably all heard on the news or seen in the newspapers that there's a salmonella outbreak. And they're saying that it's about 1,000 cases of salmonella. I don't know why they're making such a fuss over this, because on an average year, there's about 40,000 cases of salmonella. But in this particular case, they are blaming the tomatoes and cilantro and jalapenos. Well, these people seem to be like drunks looking for the nickel under the lamppost, because they know where the salmonella is coming from. I don't know why they blame the tomatoes, the cilantro, and the jalapenos, because they are passively transmitting salmonella. You cannot grow salmonella on tomatoes or cilantro or on almonds, which was last year's shtick. Salmonella only grows in a media that's been enriched with beef extract or bile salts. That's right out of Feingold's Diagnostic Microbiology. Last year, how many people remember the scare about the salmonella contaminated almonds? The almond companies responded by saying that they're going to pasteurize their raw almonds. Well, now I tracked that down, and the Permanente Farms in Kern County, California, was the manufacturer of the almonds that turned up with salmonella. And as you can see, they're right out in the middle of a desert. There's nothing here but sand except for this patch of green stuff, and that is where they grow their almonds. You wouldn't be able to grow almonds unless you had irrigation, and as it happens, Kern County has a common irrigation system. The water is brought in from Sacramento, and then it is distributed not only to the almond growers, but to the heaviest concentration of animal agriculture any place in California. And undoubtedly what happened was that the animal waste got into the irrigation trough, and the troughs contaminated the almonds. But the almond people took the hit for it. They should have told the EPA to go look at animal agriculture. You also can't grow E. coli in sprouts, and that was from a few more years back when we had a big scare about E. coli and sprouts. This is a very good book. It's written by a couple of MDs who are by no stretch of the imagination vegetarian, but their synopsis is that with the exception of a few heirloom diseases like herpes, almost all of the human contagions came from domesticated animals. Well, now, Michael Clapper is a very excellent authority. This is a very good book. I have no complaints with this book whatsoever, but in 2004, Michael spoke to us, and his topic was things about vegetarian nutrition that I no longer believe. And in the course of the talk, he mentioned that almost no one that he knew who was a vegetarian in the 70s is still a vegetarian, and that's a bit troubling. So he mounted a health study to try to find out why that was, but I think I know why. The answer is we've got too many diet books, and it's confusing people. All of these diet books work to some extent, but I will tell you why in a moment. But one thing that they all have in common is they tell you not to eat seeds and nuts. And seeds and nuts, I think, are what are missing from the contemporary vegetarian nutrition advice. Well, there are too many diet books, and they all work because once you're on the standard American diet, there's no place to go but up. In Philosophy 101, they taught us that you cannot infer aught from is. Just because war, crime, and dishonesty are always with us does not mean they ought to be. And in Nutrition 101, the same edict. You can't infer aught from is. Just because some population group is healthier than the U.S. average doesn't mean that we ought to regard their diet as optimal. Because when you're on the standard American diet, and yes, these are McDonald's arches turned upside down, there's no place to go but up. If you're eating this stuff, you can go this direction towards more animal food, and you can go this way towards more plant food, and you'll get better, because there ain't no way you can make it any worse than what Americans are eating. The first of the sort of meat-oriented recommenders was this guy, Weston Price. Has anybody ever heard of him? Okay, Lorraine, you've heard of him? Okay, Weston Price was a dentist, and in the 1930s, he went abroad and started studying primitive tribes, and he found that their dental health was excellent. And furthermore, he found that their general health was excellent. And so he came back with the idea that the important thing about their diet was that they were consuming nutrient-dense whole foods and the vital fat-soluble activators found only in animal fats. Well, the problem with this conclusion was that he was comparing the health of these primitive people who are very active. They were living outdoors. They were not taking streetcars and automobiles to get around, and they weren't eating a lot of refined carbohydrates and refined fats, which is what the Americans were doing. So, of course, they were in better shape than the Americans. Here are three more meat-oriented recommendations. The Zone by Barry Sears. He recommends a ratio of 30% protein, 30% fat, and 40% carbohydrate. And one of Sears' arguments in favor of his book was that he had gotten the Stanford swim team to go on his diet, and they won the Pac-10 that year. Well, I called the Stanford athletic department when I heard about that, and turns out that the Stanford had won the Pac-10 7 out of 10 of the past 10 years before they got on Sears' diet. This guy, Diadamo, Eat Right for Your Blood Type. Anybody know about this one? Okay. He says typos can't be vegetarian. Well, I'm a typo, and I've been a vegetarian for 56 years. There's a lot of other things to be said about this book, but there's no science. He just pulled this idea out of thin air, and he went to the publisher and made a bundle. And Atkins did the same thing. Atkins never did any studies. He got his cardiology papers and went straight to the publishers with this idea of eating mostly protein. And this was back in 1970. And when it came out, he was condemned by just about every establishment nutrition sources you could think of, the ADA, the American Medical Association, so forth. But Atkins had the last laugh. He said, "My English sheepdog will figure out nutrition before the dietitians do." And he may be right, because all the dietitians have to do is stop sorting foods by nutrient weight ratio and start sorting by nutrient calorie ratio, and then they'll start to get the right answers. Well, now on our side of that arch, the guy that threw the big curveball back in the 1970s was this guy, George Ozawa. He founded Macrobiotics, and this carried off most of the vegetarian friends that I had in Hollywood, California when I was living there. And his statement was, the principal food intended by the Creator is grain. And in his best menu, he recommended that you eat nothing but brown rice. Well, I don't know which Creator he was talking about, but this is Genesis 1:29, and God doesn't say anything about grains here. He says you eat every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has seed in it, they will be yours for food. As far as grains as a food, the only thing they really have going for them is that they're really cheap. You can get 2,200 calories, enough for your entire day's food supply for $1.21. This is approximate, you know. But the problem is that everything to the left of this red arrow, which is the RDA arrow, is deficient. They don't have enough vitamin C, vitamin B12, vitamin A, vitamin E, calcium, folate, and riboflavin. Jarrett Diamond, who's a physiologist at UCLA, had this to say about the agricultural revolution, which brought grains to the fore. The reason grains are so popular is because you can raise huge populations on grains. It's not optimal nutrition, but it's adequate, and it's enough to raise a big army and go move on the tribe next door and get more land if you happen to be a ruler with a military bent. What he said was agriculture was bad for health. First, hunter-gatherers enjoyed a varied diet, while early farmers obtained most of their food from just 3 carbohydrate plants: wheat, rice, and corn. Yet each one is deficient in certain vitamins or amino acids. Second, because of dependence on few crops, farmers ran the risk of starvation if one crop failed. Finally, agriculture encouraged people to clump together in crowded societies, carry on trade with other crowded societies, and spread parasites and infectious diseases. And that's exactly what happened as a result of the agricultural revolution. And although it happened 10,000 years ago, it's still affecting us because everybody thinks that grains ought to be the basis of the human diet. Well, now I want to investigate the question of where did our phobia for nuts come from. I think that Ancel Keys probably started it. He was a very famous researcher at the University of Minnesota. During the Second World War, he did some really important studies on fasting using conscientious objectors as his subjects. He starved them for 36 days and then found out what happened to them on starvation diet. But he also did the diet and 15-year death rate in 7 countries study, which concluded that fatal heart attacks correlated with the intake of animal fats. So far, we're doing fine. Animal fats do correlate with coronary heart disease and with heart attacks. To give you some idea about Ancel Keys, ex-GIs probably remember Keys because he invented K-rations. These are K-rations. They came with probably Spam, maybe some vegetables in there, some crackers, some cheese, some chocolate, sugar, piece of dentine gum, and the people that really made out like bandits during the Second World War were the tobacco industry, because they packed their cigarettes into every K-ration, and that generated a whole new generation of tobacco addicts. Here's some K-rations arriving at the front on a mule. And these guys, these are some of Malden's cartoon characters, and they're having a big argument over whether they should eat the K-rations or the mule. And the mule's having some second thoughts about that. He looks a little apprehensive. The next guy on our list of semi-vegetarian authors was Nathan Pritikin. Now, this guy was an uncredentialed engineer. He was quite a smart man, and he made a good living as an engineer, but he developed coronary heart disease at a time when nobody knew that there was anything you could do about it. If you had it, you're going to die from coronary heart disease. But Pritikin fooled him. He went on a high-carb, low-fat diet, and he regressed his coronary heart disease and lived many years after that. But in one point, he says, nuts are on my not on my diet. They're too high in fat. all that's left is berries. It was thought in those days that vegetarians lived on nothing but nuts and berries, which actually isn't too bad an idea. Pritikin passed his ideas directly on to John McDougall. They were good friends when John was living here in Hawaii. And McDougall says, fats are safe as long as you get them as part of the vegetables and grains you eat. Well, they are definitely safe in that way, but he doesn't say anything about nuts, and fats are okay to get from raw nuts and seeds also. If we're concerned about dietary lipids, we ought to find out where they are. Most of the lipids are in animal foods, and in animal foods, the lipids, fat, the saturated fat, the monounsaturated fat, come along with cholesterol, because cholesterol is a vital part of the cell membrane of every animal, and animals wouldn't live without the cholesterol. So when you eat animal food, you're definitely going to get not only a lot of fat, but a lot of cholesterol as well. Now, here are the grains, fruits, beans, breads, and vegetables. They have almost so little fat that you can't even see that it's there. Then we get nuts and avocados, and admittedly they have a fair amount of fat relative to all the other plant foods. They don't have very much saturated fat. The grand champ for saturated fat, if you're worried about that, is dairy products. Next guy up to bat was Dean Ornish, and Ornish was the first man to demonstrate radiographically and angiographically that by putting patients on a very high carb, low fat, almost vegan diet, that you could increase the diameter of the coronary arteries so that blood flow would improve. And that was a very landmark study, very landmark. It's had a profound influence. He's accomplished a great deal with this program. However, in his latest book, he recommends fish in order to get his omega-3 fatty acids. Now, if he hadn't had this problem with nuts, he wouldn't have had to do that, because the top source of alpha-linolenic acid, which is the first of the omega-3 fatty acids, is nuts and seeds. They're also a very good protein source, but compared to the nuts and seeds, nothing else here really has much alpha-linolenic acid. Or flaxseed, which is the grand champ. That's got more than anything else. Here's another excellent book. By the way, almost all of the people I've been mentioning have spoken to the Vegetarian Society over the years. And Campbell was one of our best speakers. And of course, his landmark China study pointed out that Chinese in rural areas where there isn't much fat in the diet are much healthier than the ones that move into the cities where the fat content goes up. He doesn't make any mention of nuts in his China study, but nuts were never a big part of the Chinese dietary habit anyway. The latest FAO data indicates that Chinese may be getting about 2.6% of calories from nuts and seeds. This is one of the fellows who's spoken to us. This is a good book. I agree with everything that's on the inside of it. He's recommending an 80-10-10 diet, 80% carb, 10% protein, 10% fat. I went through the recipes in his book and found out that the ratio is actually 82 to 6.9 to 9.2, but that's close enough because nutrition is not rocket science, and putting numbers like this on any nutrition book indicates that it is, but the USDA database is off by a factor of between 15 and 20%. There are errors in there. So while I endorse the inside of the book, I think the title implies more accuracy than can be achieved with nutrition, and this is one quote that I could not disagree with more. When it comes to fat, the source doesn't matter. Fat is fat. He thinks fat, the whole objective of a healthy diet is to get rid of all the fat. Well, the problem is that nature loves fat. All animal cell membranes are made out of fat. This very thin membrane around the outside is fat, And plant cells also use fat for their cell membranes, but the difference is that on the outside of the plant cell membrane there's a cell wall. The cell wall is made out of indigestible cellulose, otherwise known as fiber. Fat is universal throughout nature. There wouldn't be any life on this planet. Every organism on this planet uses fat to make its cell membrane, and the reason is very simple. A double layer of fat separates one aqueous area from the other aqueous area. The area inside the cell is full of water. The area outside of the cell is full of water, and you got to have a way to keep the two sides separated. So you use fat. This is a cell membrane, human cell membrane. All of these little yellow doodads here are the fatty tails of phospholipids. The little blue dots are the soluble phosphoryl groups. And then the brown doodads here in between are cholesterol, which animals use to reinforce the cell membrane. Doug Graham, the 10-10-80 fellow, points out that lacteals quickly absorb refined fat into the thoracic duct, and that's absolutely true. Fat gets absorbed through these little green channels. This is a green lacteal sticking up into the villus of the small intestine, and it goes straight from there into the thoracic duct, which is this green venous looking structure that goes up and dumps into the subclavian vein. But a similar thing can be said about sugar. If you eat sugar, it's going to go immediately into the circulation, and it's going to raise your blood sugar. It's going to put it over the moon. I think the same thing happens with refined fat. I don't think it happens when you eat nuts and seeds because they have lots of fiber. Okay, here's one of our speakers, Joel Furman. I think I agree with him more than just about anybody because this H equals N over C means health equals nutrients over calories. So he is sorting foods by nutrient-calorie ratio, a very important idea. And he endorses the consumption of nuts. But he now includes chicken and fish in his book, and I can't figure that one out. Caldwell Esselstyn has also been a speaker for us, an excellent speaker, and his excursions into the regression of cardiovascular disease have been first rate. This is an excellent book. However, he says those who have heart disease should avoid all nuts. So once again, we're back into that question of why do the people not want you to eat nuts and seeds. The reason I ask the question is that I think that the reason Clapper reported that all his friends were no longer vegetarian was that the standards had been set so high. And not only did we tell people not to eat any animal food, but we also said they had to be on a high-carb, low-fat diet, and that just may be the straw that broke the camel's back for those people. However, out of 32 nut references from PubMed, 30 of them were positive. They reported good benefits in weight loss, in regression of heart disease, and controlling diabetes, and there are only 2 negatives. One thinks that the studies were paid for by the nut industry, which could be. However, I think the thing that distinguishes healthy food from unhealthy food is fiber. All of these foods have fiber. No animal food has fiber. No vegetable oil has fiber. Vegetable oil is 100% fat, no fiber. So even the avocados and nuts and seeds have a fair allotment of fiber. They can't match vegetables and fruits, but nevertheless they've got the fiber, and none of it has been taken out. Fiber is a nutritional traffic cop, and it shortens intestinal transit time. It retards the intestinal absorption of both nutrients and adverse substances, such as saturated fat and cholesterol and pesticides and hormones. Fiber is made out of cellulose. We don't have the enzymes necessary to digest cellulose, so we can't utilize the stuff, and that's why it's not a nutrient. It's sort of an intestinal broom. It helps sweep things along, but it never gets absorbed. If it did, if we could digest cellulose, you'd never have to buy food again. You could go out and eat the trees. Now, a question comes up, well, how about coconuts and palm oil? Well, I don't think palm oil is a good idea, simply because it's an oil. But this is the palm fruit from which it is expressed. And if it was tasty, I wouldn't worry about eating it, even though it's very high in saturated fat. Coconut is also very high in saturated fat, but unless you make oil out of it, I don't think there's anything wrong with that either, because it's also got a lot of fiber. So once again, where did we get our fat phobia? Ansel Keys started it. Ken Carroll, another epidemiologist, picked it up, and he showed graphs that looked like this. This is dietary fat up the x-axis and breast cancer incidence up the y-axis, and there's a linear correlation. The more fat, the more breast cancer. I used the same FAO data, and I got this graph. It shows that an even higher risk comes from just eating animal food per se. It doesn't matter whether it's fat or whether it's just the calories from the animal food. There's a lot of stuff in animal foods that will promote cancer. Now, the problem with dissing the nuts is this. The data that Keyes used was from the FAO production yearbook. And in 1997, when I used this yearbook, it did not report the intake of seeds, nuts, or avocados. It reported total fat, animal fat, vegetable fat, total protein, animal protein, vegetable protein, calcium, and iron in the same categories. But there was no mention of avocados, of raw nuts, or raw seeds by either the FAO or by Keyes and Carroll. The FAO now does report seeds and nuts starting in 1969. This is the FAO building in Rome. I just downloaded their FAO data in PDF form and put it into a spreadsheet and found that in 169 countries reporting nut and oilseed consumption, about 2.6% of daily calories come from nuts and seeds, no more than that. And that pretty much squares with our own USDA data, which suggests that no more than 0.5% of U.S. calories come from raw nuts. While we're looking at books, here's a kind of a mediocre book with a great title. If Man Made It, Don't Eat It. You won't be able to go out and buy this book because it's out of print now, but the guy that wrote it is a vegan. Some of his arguments are a little bit on the spectacular side. Your body is becoming a garbage dump, a cesspool of filth, toxic matter, vile putrefaction, pus pockets, cysts, tumors, cancerous growths, abscesses and deposits, poisonous waste, fatty tissue, etc. You are constipated. The problem we're really dealing with here in figuring out what to eat is the addiction problem. The addiction problem is exploited by the food industry. Here's a CEO of a successful food biz. Now ask yourself, why do people go into the food business? They go into it for profit, yes, exactly. They want to make as much profit as they can, and the way they do that is by making the food taste better than it is. They want you to eat as much of the food as they can, so the things that are particularly addictive are fat, sugar, and salt, and they put that into just about everything. Now, it's easy to get away from the fat addiction if you eat raw nuts. It's easy to get away from the sugar addiction if you eat fruit, because fruit is also full of sugar in addition to fiber. Now, I don't have a solution to the salt problem. I'm still battling that one myself. I have a hard time getting away from salt. Here's a typical, this may look like a chemical formula, but it's actually the ingredients list for pretzels. And it includes hydrogenated vegetable oil, which is fat, it includes salt, and it includes sugar. So all the rest of this stuff is going along for the ride. The whole idea of putting that in there is to get you to eat more than you need. This is how the food industry works. They take real food like brown rice, wheat, peanuts, sunflower seeds, those are all healthy foods. They grind those down and turn them into feed grains or feed meal, and they slop the hogs with it. So they collect money from the farmers for the stuff that they have mangled out of all recognition, which we don't want to eat, and then they give us what's left over, which is white bread, white flour, molasses, and sugar and seed oils. Why does a salad cost more than a Big Mac? Now we're sort of coning in on the USDA. The reason our country is in such dire straits from a health standpoint is because the USDA is calling the shots on what we eat. The USDA recommends that you eat food that looks like this, mostly grains, vegetables, and fruit, some meat, some dairy up towards the top, and then up the very top, sugar, oil, and salt. That's the game that they talk. This is the walk that they walk. The subsidies from 1995 to 2005 went mostly to meat, dairy, and other animal foods, 73%. Grains got about 13%. Sugar, oil, and starch, about 10%. And vegetables and fruits are up here at the very tip top of that pyramid, 0.37% of the USDA subsidies. Here's another way of looking at the same thing. The food pyramid, the sugars, fats, dairy, and meats get $3.8 billion in subsidies, and the fruits, vegetables, and cereals, which the USDA itself says is what we're supposed to be eating, only get 170 million. 3.8 billion versus 170 million. That's sort of a ballpark figure, but that's where our problems are coming from. I estimated the costs of this USDA folly for 1991 and found out that when you add up the cost of all these diseases that are caused by bad eating habits, it comes out to about 21% of the U.S. medical costs, and the medical costs have been going up exponentially since then. They're now up to, well, let's see, the private insurance is about $1 trillion and the public insurance is about $1 trillion, so that's about $400 billion due to animal food consumption. How about using supplements? This was one of the things I was supposed to talk about in this talk. How about a calcium supplement to ward off osteoporosis? Well, there's nothing wrong with it. It might work, and maybe it's a good idea to cover your bets and take a calcium supplement. But the thing that's really causing osteoporosis in our country and all over the world is probably not calcium deficiency, but rather a negative calcium balance. And the negative calcium balance comes from eating too much methionine. Methionine is the sole sulfur essential amino acid, and as you can see, it is in greatest supply in animal foods. The sort of khaki bar is the methionine. Actually, fish has got the highest amount. Vegetables, grains, and nuts and bread and fruit have adequate amounts of methionine, but they don't overload you. Now, the problem with methionine is it breaks down to sulfate. The sulfate goes out in your urine and it takes your bone calcium with it. So when you eat a whole lot of animal protein, you're just going to pee it all into the toilet. Histidine is another amino acid, and fish has got the most of that, which probably explains why in my years as an emergency room physician, the commonest cause of hives was somebody eating fish. They'd come in with a rash all over because histidine breaks down and produces histamine, which is the thing that causes the rash and the allergic reaction. This is the stuff you should be eating. Fruits and vegetables, they ought to make up the major part of your diet. Here's some of the things that will be missing from an optimal vegan diet. There's no honey. It's not a vegan food. Probably not oil if it's optimal. You can use these fake foods as transitional foods. They help you get off the standard American diet and start eating a vegan diet. Commercial bread is kind of a disaster, as I showed earlier. You don't eat sugar. You don't eat nuts that come out of a can because they've probably been roasted and salted and probably roasted in oil, which drastically reduces their nutrient value. So what's left for a vegan? Well, you can take seeds and nuts and fruit and make a balanced diet, or you can take seeds and nuts and vegetables and make a balanced diet, as long as you add vitamin B12, because B12 is an absolute requirement. I also promised that I'd show recipes. This is the FDA Confusogram label that comes with this particular bread, which actually isn't, it looks like it's pretty good bread, but it's got an awful lot of ingredients. And one thing that they don't tell you is what the percent of calories from fat is. And so you have to go into this label and figure out how many calories per serving and how many calories from fat per serving, and then divide one from the other. It turns out there's 24% fat. That's not bad. I'm not worried about that. I think that's probably a good bread. But here's a much easier way to get your bread, and it'll turn out to have only 6% of calories from fat. This is flatbread, a cup of whole wheat flour, a half cup of water. You mix it up with an egg beater, throw it on a silicone bake pad, throw it in the oven for 40 minutes at 350 degrees, and you get this very tasty bread, which is nothing but wheat. You can make sandwiches out of it. Make sure you eat it within the first half hour, because after that it turns into stone. So thanks for listening, and if you have any questions, I'll stick around and answer them. Any questions? Okay, my website is www.vegsource.com/Harris. It's vegsource.com/Harris/food-comp-HTML or HTM. And it'll allow you to download a 16 megabyte Excel spreadsheet. If you have Excel, you can use it. If you have Excel later than 2000, you may have a problem. This was written in Excel 97, and for some reason, they didn't remain compatible. Question back there? Can you get iron? Yes, you definitely can. Let's see if I can find the best way to get iron in the whole world is eat a lot of leafy greens, because leafy greens have more iron than just about anything. I did a graph of the iron content in various foods, and the top iron source for animal foods is pig liver, but the highest source for plant foods was twice as high as that, and that was parsley. Now, any leafy green is going to be stuffed full of iron, because remember, if you eat animal food, the animal just got the iron from the plants that it ate. So any leafy green vegetable will have lots of iron. Now, the reason that vegetarians tend to have, or reputedly have, problems with iron, I think, is due to the fact that, just as I said, we based our nutritional recommendations on grains. Furthermore, a lot of vegetarians also include dairy products, which are not only completely deficient in iron, but inhibit the absorption of iron. So, more leafy greens, less grains. And the other problem is, of course, that women are more subject to iron deficiency anemia, which is probably a misnomer. It's not really a dietary iron deficiency. It's simply blood loss that occurs at a rate faster than you can keep up with. And usually it's an occult blood loss. People tend to bleed from the bowel and not know about it. But women obviously are going to lose blood every month. So for women, it's more of a problem to keep up with the iron. But I think that short of going on iron supplements, which you might have to do, the best thing to do is eat lots of leafy greens, because that's where the iron is. Okay, the question is, osteoporosis is caused by negative calcium balance, and that means that you're losing calcium faster than you can take it in. So that puts you in negative calcium balance. And the thing that causes negative calcium balance is too much animal protein in the diet, because Animal protein is full of an amino acid called methionine. The methionine is very acidic, and in order to buffer the acid that is being produced by the methionine when it breaks down, your body has to take calcium out of your bone. And it takes it out at a rate faster than you can put it back in, so your bones tend to become osteoporotic. The one thing that I should point out, perhaps the best remedy for osteoporosis of all, even more so than what you eat, is lots of exercise, because load-bearing exercise actually strengthens your bone. The other thing, if you're worried about breaking bones, the best thing I can think of is learn how to fall, because sooner or later you will fall. And if you know how to fall in such a way that the impact is taken up by a large body area, you're much less likely to break anything. So the whole trick is, if you fall, make sure that you kind of roll into it so that your back or your buttocks or something large is taking the load. The first thing they teach us in parachute jumping is how to do a parachute roll. If you miss your landing, you, instead of falling forwards on your wrists and breaking both of them, you roll onto your back. It's kind of like a judo roll, and that's very important. Probably more important than any pill or any food supplements as you can take, because there are a lot of people who have below average bone mineral density who don't break, and it's because they know how to fall down. Okay, the question is twofold. What about caffeine? Well, caffeine is a stimulant, as you know, and I would say it is kind of an addiction. It's not one of the real bad ones, but what caffeine does is it releases adrenaline from your adrenal gland, and that in turn releases sugar from your liver, and your brain runs on sugar. So this is happy hunting grounds for your brain. It loves to get a load of caffeine, sugar, and adrenaline all at the same time because it runs on sugar. Cooking. Yeah, you lose some nutrient value when you cook, but on the other hand, if you cook tomatoes, the evidence is that some of the nutrients will be more bioavailable, so that's the other side of it. I think, how much more time do we have? 1 minute. I guess you got to sign me out. We're running out of tape.
Thank you, Dr. Bill. Let's do this. Now, as always, we have refreshments from Down to Earth. Please do not bring them on the dance floor, and that's available to you. If you have a little bit of energy, please pick up your chair and hang it on one of those things in the back of the room. If you've been sitting for an hour, that would be a good thing to do. And I do have an announcement. There is a fresh dining guide updated this afternoon, available on the literature table.
I failed to give a conclusion to my previous remarks. I think that in order to optimize your diet, you should base it on fresh, raw fruits and vegetables because they have the highest mineral, vitamin, and fiber content. I am grateful to the high carbohydrate authors who have made a major contribution to human health. But I think that they would have gotten the same results and perhaps better patient compliance without the severe restrictions on raw nuts, seeds, and avocados, which makes the vegan diet so restrictive that it scares off many potential vegans. Since I feel that the vegan diet is a solution also to ethical and environmental problems, I must say that I find no science to back up the high carbohydrate, low fat theory. If you are healthy and content with a high carbohydrate, low fat vegan diet that excludes even unprocessed, naturally fatty plant foods, by all means stick with it. But be aware that of 32 references on raw avocados, nuts, and seeds, only one was negative. I think that macronutrient ratios are irrelevant. What counts is the source of the food. If it has all of its original fiber, then it is unprocessed plant food. If it has no fiber, it's either refined sugar, refined oil, or animal food. And those are the categories that cause obesity and disease.
This program is brought to you by the Vegetarian Society of Hawaii, a nonprofit organization dedicated to sharing with the community the many benefits of a vegetarian diet. Free monthly meetings include vegetarian experts found locally and on the mainland, quick and easy cooking demonstrations, and helpful and delicious food samples. Members enjoy an informative quarterly newsletter, social activities, and discounts at many vegetarian-friendly restaurants and health food stores. For an application, call 944-8344. That's 944-8344. Or visit our website at www.vsh.org. vsh.org.